At the beginning of Faust stand what may be described as a poetic introduction, composed of 3 brief pieces whose artistic relationship to the main work is clarified by their placement outside rather than within the drama itself. Each arises from a source external to the play, being personal in tone or explanatory of what follows. Some have objected that these elements disrupt the unity of the poem, yet such criticism misses the point, for they do not belong to that unity at all. They are 3 statements that cast light forward upon the work without forming an organic part of it, 3 insights useful for the reader before embarking on the journey of Faust. They reveal certain attitudes of the poet toward his own creation, offering glimpses through his perspective upon his work. The first piece, the dedication, suggests the different periods of life and varying moods in which the work was composed, especially the renewed spirit in which it was later resumed. The second, titled The Prelude on the Stage, presents a firm declaration that the drama does not follow conventional patterns and is not well suited for ordinary theatrical performance. Indeed, it must be perceived in some manner beyond the stage. The third, The Prologue in Heaven, represents a bold imaginative leap, rising from the narrow confines of earthly theatre to the infinite realm above, where the theme is seen in its truest form and its ultimate outcome anticipated, not on a limited human stage, but within the divine order of existence. These introductory pieces deserve further unfolding, as they suggest guiding principles for interpretation drawn from the poet's own viewpoint. The latter two are especially significant in this regard. The dedication itself is a lyrical expression of feeling, likened to the music of an Aeolian harp, in which the poet looks back upon earlier companions, both living and departed, and their close connection to his creations, particularly Faust. Written in the year 1797, when the poet was nearing 48 years of age, it reflects a perspective shaped by many changing phases of life. The work of Faust had occupied his mind for more than a quarter of a century, partly formed yet largely existing as shifting imaginative shapes. Upon returning to this youthful project, human figures from memory arise alongside poetic forms, blending together. The poet turns inward, recalling the past, tuning his expression to a mood of remembrance. He withdraws from the present, from the unfamiliar audience now listening, and feels a longing to retreat into a quiet spiritual realm where so many former companions reside. This moment stands as one of the rare instances in which he turns away from immediate reality and the living present, yielding instead to memory and quiet longing. Yet such a realm was never truly his domain. His life's work remained rooted in the present world, where he continually sought to hold the eternal within the immediate moment. Though he may have seemed to himself advanced in years at that time, reflecting tenderly upon the past, the future still held much for him. The period during which Faust would continue to develop extended far beyond what had already passed, requiring more than a third of a century before the final forms of those once floating shapes were fixed in the poem. He was not yet so near to that distant spiritual realm, and those who awaited him there would have to wait longer still. The tone of the dedication, as suggested by the poet himself, resembles the sound of an Aeolian harp, its strings stirred by gentle currents of memory. It represents the most direct personal expression in the work, a brief and passing sigh cast backward. From these fleeting notes, however, one lasting truth emerges. Faust is not a sudden outpouring of genius, but the product of a lifetime marked by many phases, like a great structure built across different eras, unified by a single underlying design. The Prelude on the stage raises a central question. How is a drama, this very drama of Faust, to be created? 3 figures appear to address this question, each representing a different force behind theatrical production. They embody distinct viewpoints, shaped by their roles, as they consider the formation of the work. The idea may have been influenced by an earlier dramatic model, where a similar introductory exchange appears. 2 of these figures direct their attention entirely toward the audience, the broad public whose approval or rejection determines success. To win its favor, to satisfy its shifting tastes, to please what is portrayed as an ever-demanding and childlike collective becomes their primary aim. Yet they pursue this goal in different ways. The manager, concerned with staging the production, asks what profit can be gained. The actor, whose task is to bring characters to life in the immediate moment, seeks applause and personal recognition. The artistic value of the work itself matters little to them. Their focus rests on what they individually may gain from it. In contrast stands the poet, the true creator of the drama. His attention turns away from the crowd, which he views as a distracting multitude. He suggests that genuine art cannot be immediately understood, declaring that what merely dazzles is fleeting, while what is true endures for the future. With firm resolve, he takes his position, rejecting the pursuit of popularity and financial reward as unworthy aims. To him, such motives are not guiding inspirations but destructive forces that can corrupt artistic integrity. His concern lies wholly with the work itself, not with the audience that must come to understand it in time. He chooses to follow the path dictated by his art, regardless of public opinion. If the people fail to appreciate his creation, the fault, in his view, does not lie with the work. One may well feel a sense of elevation in hearing this powerful declaration drawn from the great book, fully worthy of the creator of Faust. The poet affirms with unmistakable emphasis that his standpoint lies within his theme, not within his audience. His calling comes from the work itself, not from those who hear it. Should they fail to understand, the responsibility lies with them to learn. This utterance springs from the very heart of literature and carries a lasting truth valuable for every age, particularly the present. To grasp a work that belongs to eternity requires a corresponding breadth of time, and the true poet acts in accordance with this awareness. Faust was not understood at first and remains imperfectly understood even now, yet the poet foresaw this outcome and proceeded nonetheless, compelled to create. The manager, in contrast, appears as a thoroughly practical figure, engaged with tangible results and immediate success. He speaks with a clear sense of business and offers the poet advice on how to construct a drama that will fill the theatre. His principle is simple. If a play is to be given, it must be given in fragments rather than as an organic whole. A unified structure, he argues, will only invite the audience to tear it apart. The drama, in his view, should appeal primarily to the senses, presenting a shifting spectacle of scenes, actions, and theatrical effects. Unity, depth, and a spiritual center are dismissed. Instead, he advocates confusion as the highest aim. To overwhelm the audience with a chaotic multiplicity, to lead them astray in a restless sequence of impressions. This, for him, constitutes theatrical success. Against such counsel stands the poet's resolute reply. He refuses to submit to such demands. His response carries a tone of defiance that resounds like a trumpet, rejecting any compromise that would betray the integrity of art. He will not degrade his calling nor violate the deeper needs of human nature. In place of confusion, he defines the true function of the poet as one who brings unity and harmony, through both inner and outer balance. Through the concord of verse and the coherence of spirit, the poet transforms the discord of existence into an ordered, rhythmic whole. Nature's monotony and the conflicts of the soul are reshaped into a movement that gathers all elements into a harmonious expression. One particular utterance deserves special attention, for it touches the deepest idea within the work. Who is it that calls the individual into universal consecration, where it resounds in noble harmony? The reference is clearly to the poet. The essential thought is that the individual rises into the universal, and in doing so becomes truly consecrated and capable of producing harmony. This movement from the particular to the universal defines the poetic method itself. It sheds light upon the entire scope of Faust, offering a guiding principle for its interpretation. The terms individual and universal, though philosophical in nature, are woven seamlessly into poetic imagery, revealing both the outward form and inward meaning of the work. The task, then, is to recognize within each particular element its broader significance, through which it gains a higher, almost sacred character and becomes an expression of poetry. To clarify this idea, several examples illustrate the transformation. The storm, a single phenomenon of nature, becomes an image of the passions within the human soul. The redness of evening, another natural occurrence, takes on a deeper, spiritual meaning. The blossoms of spring come to symbolize love, while the laurel's green leaves signify merit. These are no longer mere objects, but are elevated into poetic expressions. Even the realm of the divine is shaped through this process, as the dwelling place of the gods is unified into a single harmonious order. In this highest form of concord, all finite elements are brought together into unity. The poet who accomplishes this stands not merely as an individual, but as a universal presence, embodying the very principle he expresses. A certain translation of this crucial line, however, obscures its meaning, rendering it vague and even contrary to the original intention. This provides occasion for a broader reflection upon that translation as a whole, which, though widely used and often recommended, requires careful qualification. While it succeeds in conveying aspects of language, rhythm, and imagery, it reveals a notable weakness in its grasp of the philosophical dimension of Faust. This limitation is significant, especially in light of the judgment of major thinkers who have recognized the work as a supreme philosophical poem. The difficulty lies not in the presence of philosophy itself, but in its handling. Some have distorted the poem by forcing upon it rigid systems foreign to its nature, yet to exclude philosophy altogether proves equally damaging. Without an understanding of its deeper thought, the work cannot be fully translated or interpreted. The translation in question often displays sensitivity to the immediate and sensory elements of poetry, capturing the individual aspects effectively. However, it fails to elevate these elements into their universal significance, which constitutes the highest achievement of the original work. In this respect, it remains external to the very principle it seeks to convey, and its hold upon the deeper meaning of the poem is consequently limited. While many might consider this absence of philosophical weight an advantage, it must instead be recognized as a serious deficiency. Nevertheless, the translation retains value as a living work and continues to deserve attention. Its merits do not negate its shortcomings, and it may still serve as a useful guide, provided its limitations are understood. Through this prelude, the poet himself offers essential guidance for approaching Faust. He reveals, in advance, the method by which the work should be read and understood, and equally important, the ways in which it should not be approached. It must not be viewed through the perspective of the manager or the actor, both of whom focus on personal gain rather than on the work itself. One seeks profit, urging confusion and sensory distraction without unity or thought. The other seeks fame, presenting a mixture of scattered impressions, errors, and partial truths. Such approaches may produce a certain kind of entertainment, but they do not give rise to a true poem. In this manner, the two sides engage in dialogue concerning the work of art, one representing its eternal element, the other its fleeting and phenomenal phase. A profound dualism, present in literature and in the universe itself, is here brought into speech. The distinction between essence and appearance becomes evident, and appearance further divides into two forms, embodied by the manager and the actor. Both belong to the realm of surfaces, existing within and producing only outward manifestation. Their task is to present the visible form of the work, while the poet alone creates its inner life and must himself embody that spirit. His position rests within the work itself. He must follow its demands rather than the dictates of those figures who dwell in appearances. Should he abandon this ground for the sake of money or fame, he risks being cast down from his firm foundation into the shifting sea of illusion, where he would become as transient as the appearances he once resisted. The reader, then, must either stand with the poet or set the book aside. The figure who presents this contrast, Goethe, had within himself all three roles. He was above all a poet, yet he also served for many years as director of a theatre and possessed skill as a performer. Thus, the different aspects of his own nature meet here in conversation, each clearly expressed within the unity of his character. He had experienced both the enduring and the transient sides of existence and felt their tension. Therefore, he stages this brief dramatic exchange as a prelude to the larger drama of Faust, which will likewise reveal what is lasting within the passing life of humanity. This same conflict, rooted in that fundamental dualism, has existed from the beginning and will persist indefinitely, for both viewpoints belong to human nature. One might imagine that Shakespeare himself could have written such a prelude to his plays, for he too embodied these three roles: owner, performer, and poet. It is often said, in a simplified account of his genius, that he wrote merely to fill the theatre and earn money. Yet many playwrights have shared that motive without attaining his stature. His true aim above all was poetic, to present the deepest truth in its highest form. His standpoint lay within the work itself, not in financial reward. The drama served as his means of expressing truth, portraying through action the conflicts and harmonies of existence, just as others in different times have used epic poetry, religious symbolism, or philosophical thought to reveal the same reality. While Shakespeare hints at such a purpose within his works, here the poet speaks it openly. The tone of this scene carries a note of humor, tinged with irony. The manager and the actor, especially the latter, a comedian by profession, appear as comic figures, whose weaknesses reveal themselves beneath their words with a subtle and knowing glance toward the reader. Even the poet is not without a touch of this playful contradiction. Though earnest and elevated in spirit, he shows something of the idealist who withdraws from the world yet must inevitably return to it. He cannot remain in pure abstraction. He must descend again to the concrete, to the individual, in order to raise it toward universal meaning. Human life cannot be sustained in an atmosphere entirely removed from reality. There is also within him a faint note of complaint, one that invites a sympathetic smile. It is the familiar voice of the unrecognized genius, who, despite his lofty stance, still desires some measure of acknowledgment. Even in his elevated position, determined to fulfill a higher calling, he casts a subtle glance toward his earthly audience. This mixture of greatness and quiet longing makes him human, and it is difficult not to respond with a certain gentle amusement. Yet this very lack of immediate recognition serves its purpose. Had Faust been fully appreciated from the outset, this reflective prelude might never have been written. After the poet has expressed his elevated understanding of his vocation, the actor introduces a comic contrast by presenting an opposing view. He dismisses the idea of universal significance and focuses entirely on the immediate and sensory aspect of experience. Taking a simple love story as an example, he describes how events unfold by chance until they form a narrative. From this, a play may be constructed. In doing so, he offers a lively and humorous reflection on an earlier creative period, recalling works shaped by youthful emotion and sentiment. During that time, feeling dominated expression, and audiences responded with a mixture of laughter and tears, carried along by the rhythm and illusion of the language. Now, however, that phase has passed. The individual element is no longer valued merely for itself, but for its connection to a broader meaning. The earlier period, when imagination cast a veil over reality and every experience seemed filled with wonder, has given way to a more reflective stage. What once appeared full of promise is now recognized as containing both illusion and truth, a longing for truth intertwined with a fondness for illusion. This earlier phase, vividly embodied in certain episodes of the drama, gradually recedes as the work moves forward. The composition now becomes more reflective, with each element bearing deeper significance and contributing to a unified whole. The poet acknowledges this shift with a touch of humor, looking back upon his earlier self with a mixture of affection and distance. The manager, true to his role, concludes the exchange with a final practical remark. He dismisses discussion of inspiration, insisting that if one is a poet, one should simply produce poetry. He then outlines his vision of a successful play. It should employ abundant spectacle, with elaborate settings, machinery, and effects, drawing upon all elements of the natural and cosmic world. The stage should encompass everything, moving rapidly through all realms of existence. Such, in his view, is the ideal drama. This conception, however, belongs entirely to the realm of outward display. It seeks grandeur through accumulation rather than depth. The poet's work, by contrast, follows a different path. Instead of merely passing through various realms for spectacle, It moves through negation toward reconciliation, ultimately reaching harmony. The true movement is not toward display, but toward meaning. The poet is aware, however, that his work will not be readily embraced. He anticipates misunderstanding and rejection, recognizing that a work of this nature must undergo neglect before it is fully appreciated. Like something that must pass through suffering before attaining recognition, it endures dismissal before achieving lasting significance. Thus, the scene shifts from the earthly to the higher realm, where the deeper essence of the work is revealed. The perspective expands beyond the limited stage to a broader vision, allowing insight into what lies beyond appearances. What is presented is not merely the outward form of the drama, but the enduring idea that the poet perceived when he lifted his gaze from the finite to the infinite. In a single powerful act of imagination, the poet now places before the mind the vast order of the world in which his hero is situated and within which he must carry out the task of existence. It is as though one sweeping vision extends forward through the entire course of the poem, even to the farthest limits of time itself. Though this vision is but one glance, it reaches deeply and widely. Yet along its course certain resting points may be marked, where the attentive follower may pause briefly before being carried onward again through the boundless scope of the poet's thought. At the outset, 4 fundamental elements become clear, each embodied in a distinct type of being. First stands the primal presence, the Lord, the undivided and self-existent spirit. Second come the unalienated beings, the archangels, who dwell nearest to the Lord and continually praise him, sustained by their direct and unbroken vision. Third appears the alienated figure, Mephisto, the fallen spirit who, having turned away, persists in that separation. Finally there is the human figure, Faust, around whom the entire action revolves, though he does not yet appear. He too is destined to fall, to be separated from his divine origin, yet unlike the other, he is to overcome this division and return. His task is to bridge that original gulf within the universe which lies between the divine and the demonic. The conception of this scene draws upon a biblical source, echoing the account found in the book of Job. In that ancient narrative, the setting is a gathering among the divine, where Satan appears among the others, suggesting a strange inclusion within the same order. There the Lord and Satan, representing the opposing extremes of the spiritual realm, enter into discussion concerning Job, a human being devoted to God. Satan maintains that such devotion depends entirely upon prosperity, a view consistent with his nature. The Lord, however, holds otherwise. A trial is therefore permitted, subjecting the man to severe hardship in order to reveal whether his fidelity endures. The outcome determines whether he remains true under suffering or is consumed by it. This ancient story stands as one of the earliest and most profound attempts to express the condition of humanity. It brings into relation the opposing forces of preservation and destruction, showing them in dialogue concerning the fate of man. Central to it is the theme of adversity as a test, affirming that true devotion cannot be shaken by misfortune. Yet the modern figure introduced here bears a deeper and more complex burden. The struggle is no longer confined to external suffering, but reaches into the inner life of the soul. Further connections to biblical thought emerge, as this scene may be seen as a new rendering of the beginning, concerned with the modern human condition. It explores the origin and purpose of evil within the structure of existence. The eternal thought, present before creation and still active, enters into dialogue with itself, dividing into opposing aspects. Within this exchange, permission is granted for the testing of the human figure, much as the first human was tempted in the garden. The underlying suggestion is that such opposition is necessary. Without the presence of the negative, human activity could not arise. The implication follows that this opposing force is not merely incidental but essential, even within the broader order of existence. The power of negation must exist in order to be confronted and ultimately overcome. Such an idea may seem troubling to a more traditional religious sensibility, which prefers a simpler division between divine and demonic, without probing deeper into their relationship. Yet attempts to explain the origin of evil have long occupied theological thought, often seeking to account for it as something external. In earlier writings, the adversarial figure appears already present, even before humanity itself, raising the question of origin. Later interpretations extended this narrative by imagining a prior fall among the angels, with this figure as their leader. While this adds depth to the story, it does not resolve the fundamental mystery. The poet's conception moves beyond these earlier accounts, placing the figure not in an earthly setting but in the highest realm before the human trial begins. Yet the imagery carries a distinctly historical tone, resembling a courtly scene in which the Lord appears as a ruler surrounded by attendants, while the adversary enters in the role of a jester, offering his challenge with cunning wit. This blending of serious and humorous elements recalls older dramatic traditions, where sacred themes were presented with a degree of freedom that might unsettle more rigid sensibilities. Instead of the solemn tone associated with ancient sacred texts, there emerges here a different kind of expression, one marked by a certain humor that coexists with sincerity. The adversarial figure is not portrayed with overwhelming grandeur, but with a quality that borders on the ironic, even the absurd. This reflects a long-standing tradition in which such a figure is seen not as an equal rival to God, but as a distorted reflection, limited and ultimately subject to a higher order. Such a portrayal has not always been received without objection. Some have regarded it as irreverent, reacting strongly against the mixture of the sacred and the comic. Yet a deeper understanding suggests otherwise. A conception grounded in thoughtful reverence need not be disturbed by this representation. Rather, it may recognize within it a meaningful perspective. In the broader movement of existence, this opposing force is not independent or triumphant, but continually brought within the greater harmony. Seen from a higher vantage, its efforts appear not only limited but ultimately futile. Thus, within this vision, the adversarial figure assumes a role that is, in a sense, subordinate and even ironic. His intentions, though serious to himself, are destined to fail, collapsing within the very process of their unfolding. In this way he is presented throughout the work, not as a dominant power, but as one whose actions, however disruptive, are ultimately contained within a larger and more enduring order. From this scene there may arise a form of thoughtful reverence, one that is secure enough in itself to admit even humor, and capable of casting a light, ironic glance upon the divine order. Such a reverence perceives, as the poet does, the presence of the devil within the court of God, not as an equal power, but as a figure of mockery, the clown of the universe. To the individual who becomes entangled in his cunning devices, he may appear formidable for a time, yet even that individual, if sincere, will ultimately be delivered. This assurance is expressed by the Lord and stands as humanity's central hope. The destructive activity of the devil ultimately turns back upon itself, dissolving within the greater movement of events. The new Adam is destined for salvation, even though the old Adam undergoes a tragic fall and exile from paradise. An ancient conception has thus been taken, given a medieval form, and filled with a modern meaning. The central question now unfolds: how this modern individual, Faust, with his contemporary consciousness, is to find his place within the vast order of the world. The structure of the prologue divides into two clearly defined parts, marked by a distinct shift in style, rhythm, and thought. The first consists of the song of the archangels. The second introduces Mephisto, both unfolding in the presence of the Lord. The opening movement, the song, draws upon the highest imagery available to human imagination, taken from the sun, the earth, and the powerful forces of nature. It is a hymn to the harmonious physical universe, a vision of the cosmos that reflects, in broad outlines, a deeper spiritual order. The archangels serve as the singers, each expressing through artistic form a different aspect of this universal harmony. Each selects a separate image from the cosmos, revealing a distinct character and a particular stage within the unfolding order. Raphael appears as the most original and serene, contemplating the sun as his symbol of eternal harmony, radiating pure and uninterrupted light. For him, this light represents the undimmed presence of God, as well as the essence of his own being. Gabriel turns to the earth as his image, introducing an element of shadow into the brightness described by Raphael. With him begins the first suggestion of opposition, the initial hint of duality. He observes not only light but also the interplay between opposing forces, such as sea and land, and thus expresses a deeper awareness in which the first tensions of existence are felt, though they remain within an overarching harmony. Michael advances further, choosing the storm as his image. What had been a quiet contrast between light and darkness becomes, in his vision, an active and forceful conflict, expressed through lightning and destruction. In him, the negative aspect of nature takes on dynamic form, revealing a chain of cause and effect marked by violence and disruption. Yet even here, the movement resolves into a greater order, returning to a peaceful and balanced state. Through these three figures, a progression becomes visible. Each embodies a deeper engagement with the contradictions of the world, moving toward an awareness that approaches, but does not yet reach, the realm of spiritual negation. Though distinct in their perspectives, the archangels unite at last in a shared expression of reverence for the Lord, acknowledging both his greatness and his incomprehensibility. Their vision remains immediate and unbroken. They have not passed through the experience of division or estrangement. They exist in a state of original harmony, untouched by the knowledge that brings separation. Yet within their song there is already a movement toward that division, a gradual approach toward the condition represented by Mephisto. Their combined hymn thus reflects a process leading toward the emergence of negation within the universal order. The presence of these figures draws upon an ancient tradition, rooted in earlier conceptions of the divine order, yet here they are given a new significance. In other works they may appear as ascending toward the divine, but in this instance their movement suggests an approach toward division rather than a return to unity. The poet transforms inherited imagery, allowing it to express a more modern insight. While the archangels remain immersed in contemplation, one among them approaches the boundary of another realm, perceiving destruction as part of the universal design. Yet he does not cross into that domain. Instead, he returns to the shared expression of praise, affirming the sustaining power of the Lord, even if it cannot be fully comprehended. Amid this vast sweep of thought, the musical quality of the passage must not be overlooked. The song unfolds with a grandeur that seems to echo the harmony of the cosmos itself, as if its rhythm were drawn from the movement of celestial bodies. One hears in it an echo of a primordial music, as though distant voices were singing across the expanse of creation. The imagery is immense, and the elements are woven together into a unified whole, resembling a great musical composition in which diverse lines converge into a single, powerful resonance. Each voice contributes its own pattern, and all merge into a final harmony. This is truly a song of the cosmos, expressing the underlying order of the universe. Yet the tone shifts abruptly with the entrance of Mephisto. He does not sing, and neither does the Lord. Instead, they speak. The elevated hymn gives way to dialogue, and the subject itself demands reflection rather than musical expression. The verse adapts accordingly, becoming more irregular and flexible, suited to the exchange that follows. In this change, the character of Mephisto emerges, marked by sharpness and irony, while the calm assurance of the Lord stands in contrast. The movement thus turns from song to discussion, and attention shifts to the figure whose presence has transformed both the meaning and the form of the scene. The appearance of Mephisto now follows. He stands as the figure of alienation, seeming to belong on the opposite side of heaven, yet still remaining, in a paradoxical way, a member of the heavenly order. He enters into the presence of the Lord despite his fall, embodying separation while still belonging to the whole. He cannot be excluded from the universe, for even alienation has its place within it. The archangels were seen to move gradually toward opposition and physical conflict, yet they never crossed into the abyss. With Mephisto, however, the transition is complete, and negation becomes spiritual in nature. This is the essence of the devil. If thou hadst not all merriment unlearned, of suns and worlds I've nothing to be quoted. How men torment themselves is all I've noted. The little god the world sticks to the same old way, and is as whimsical as on creation's day. Life somewhat better might content him, but for the gleam of heavenly light which thou hast lent him. He calls it reason, thence his powers increased, to be far beastlier than any beast. Saving thy gracious presence, he to me a long-legged grasshopper appears to be, that springing flies, and flying springs, and in the grass the same old ditty sings. Would he still lay among the grass he grows in, each bit of dung he seeks, to stick his nose in? The question arises as to what this spiritual negation consists of. The poet makes this clear. It lies in the denial of reason, expressed by Mephisto before the Lord with scornful mockery. Humanity itself has at times shared in this denial, aligning with the same destructive impulse. Even thinkers have contributed to it, treating reason as illusion or reducing it to confusion. Such rejection represents the highest form of negation and gives rise to the demonic character. A crucial distinction must be observed between reason and understanding, a distinction central to deeper thought and clearly present here. Reason, in its highest form, grasps the totality, comprehends the whole, and seeks the ultimate truth. It stands apart from the immediate contemplation of the archangels, who perceive but do not fully comprehend, and also from the understanding, which concerns itself with practical use rather than truth. The understanding asks what purpose something serves, even reducing the highest reality to a question of utility. Mephisto, therefore, treats the praise of the archangels with a passing sneer, but reserves his deepest hostility for reason itself. He prefers the realm of understanding, which is limited, bound to finite ends, and concerned only with means rather than ultimate purpose. It sees fragments rather than the total process. For this reason, Mephisto has sometimes been interpreted as the embodiment of understanding, yet he goes beyond mere limitation, for he possesses awareness. He knows the truth he denies, and in that knowledge lies his deeper guilt. If he erred only through ignorance, he would not be the devil. His denial is deliberate, and therefore complete. This is why human sins are forgiven. It is because, unlike the devil, as Jesus says on the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." A dialogue unfolds between the Lord and Mephisto, presenting a free exchange between the opposing forces of the spiritual order. The subject is Faust, the human figure whose destiny is under consideration. The question is whether he will descend into ruin or return to the good after passing through error. Mephisto adopts a pessimistic view, seeing only corruption in the world and in humanity. He mocks aspiration and ridicules the striving of Faust as futile. The Lord, in contrast, affirms a more hopeful vision. Within that same striving he acknowledges the presence of error, yet declares it to be the path through which truth is reached. The order of the world, as expressed by the Lord, reveals that what is negative ultimately destroys itself. Humanity, by aligning with this order, must overcome the negative within and thereby reflect the highest reality. In doing so, the individual rises beyond division, moving from alienation toward unity. The human being, placed between opposing forces, is destined to comprehend both and transcend them. Though created below the level of the angels, such a being carries the potential to surpass them by attaining knowledge of the divine. Two statements made about Faust must be understood together. On the one hand, it is said that as long as a human being strives, error is inevitable. Aspiration itself implies incompleteness and limitation. On the other hand, it is affirmed that a good person, even while struggling in uncertainty, remains aware of the right path. Within this striving lies the power to overcome error. Like a flowing stream that purifies itself as it moves forward, the striving soul gradually frees itself from its own limitations. Thus striving contains a double nature. It leads into error, yet also provides the means of overcoming it. This dynamic becomes the central force of the entire work, beginning at the outset and continuing through to its conclusion. The same impulse that may lead one astray also guides one toward illumination. In striving toward wholeness, the individual already participates in it. To abandon striving altogether would mean spiritual ruin. The wager proposed by Mephisto carries little real weight. It is not truly accepted by the Lord, nor does it play a decisive role later. It remains more an expression of Mephisto's boastful nature. In essence, however, It anticipates the later agreement between Faust and Mephisto, both serving as reflections on the ultimate outcome of the human journey. This opening scene offers a strong indication of a positive resolution to the struggle that lies ahead. The prologue was composed toward the end of the 18th century, at a time when the conclusion of the entire work had already taken shape in the poet's mind. It was later published alongside the completed first part, suggesting an intention to assure readers of the work's direction long before its full completion. Alongside its biblical echoes, the scene also recalls elements of earlier dramatic traditions in which divine and demonic figures appear together. Yet those earlier forms appear limited when compared to the vast scope presented here. The entire work may be seen as a grand dramatic structure extending from a heavenly beginning to a heavenly conclusion. While this opening does not form part of the main action itself, which begins on earth and rises upward, it frames the whole within a larger vision, linking its movement between the highest realms. Faust is thus entrusted by the Lord to Mephisto, who is to draw him away from his primitive fountainhead and lead him along the paths of error and evil. This act originates with the Lord himself, yet it demands the active participation of Faust, through which he will ultimately return to that source transformed. True manhood cannot be attained without struggle. Only through confronting and overcoming the devil does he gain the strength necessary for his development. The conflict is primarily inward, a struggle within his own being, and the victory is likewise internal, the shaping and completion of the whole person. Step by step, he confronts his own weakness and wrongdoing, rising beyond his limitations into a state of genuine freedom, constructing for himself a realm in which he may truly dwell. The Lord grants Mephisto full freedom in this task, allowing him to act without restraint in tempting Faust. Such an unrestricted adversary is presented as necessary, serving to awaken human activity. The devil thus holds a defined place within the order of the universe, not as an accident, but as an essential element. Indeed, there is even a suggestion that the Lord takes a certain interest in this figure, who appears as a kind of cosmic jester. Among all spirits that deny this one is least objectionable, there is an element of humor in his presence, distinguishing him from darker and more destructive forces. His sharp wit and ironic tone give him a peculiar place within the divine order, even hinting at the possibility of amusement within that higher realm. Within this portrayal, a dual nature becomes evident in Mephisto, which has led to differing interpretations. On one side, he appears as a mischievous and playful figure, a bringer of wit and disturbance. On the other, he embodies malice and destructive intent. These aspects, however, are not separate but belong to a single character, expressing different degrees of the same essence. In lighter moments, he may seem almost genial, even charming, yet in his darker expressions, he reveals the same underlying nature. From a higher perspective, his efforts remain futile, his role ultimately comic. Seen in the full scope of the universal order, his actions, however serious they appear, are destined to fail. The form of this prologue carries profound meaning. The figure of negation, represented by Mephisto, appears as a court fool before the ruler of all existence. His designs, when viewed in their entirety, cancel themselves out, and this self-defeating quality gives them a comic character. Such a portrayal arises from a deep intuitive grasp of the subject, presenting it in its fullest reality. This approach cannot be irreverent, for truth itself commands reverence. Yet reverence must be distinguished from mere habit or unexamined belief. One may respect or even cherish what is inherited, but true reverence requires fidelity to conviction. The example set here calls for a courage that follows truth wherever it leads, confident that such a path ultimately brings illumination. From this vantage point, the role of Mephisto differs depending on the realm in which he appears. In the higher order, his actions take on a comic aspect, yet within human experience, they may become serious, even tragic. The unfolding of Faust's story reflects this dual character, containing both elements within its course. Seen in this light, any charge of irreverence falls away. The portrayal of Mephisto corresponds to his true nature as perceived from the highest standpoint. Within that perspective, he cannot appear otherwise than as a figure whose efforts are limited and ultimately ineffective. To present him differently would distort the truth. The double nature of striving, introduced here, forms the central principle of the work. Genuine effort leads inevitably into error, yet through that same process leads toward truth. In striving sincerely, the individual undergoes a process of self-purification. This idea offers one of the deepest consolations contained within the work. It presents a vision in which humanity is not left outside the realm of fulfillment, but finds within itself the means of return. The process of restoration becomes internal, arising through struggle and transformation. The conflict is no longer external or symbolic alone, but takes place within the inner life, giving rise to a new understanding of the human condition. The prologue thus introduces a vision of the inner world as a kind of spiritual cosmos, possessing its own harmony. Within this inner movement there is a form of order and resonance comparable to the harmony of the universe itself. The work gives expression to this subtle and intricate music, presenting a view that extends beyond earlier conceptions while remaining connected to them. It does not oppose older understandings, but carries them forward into a more developed form, reflecting the continuing evolution of human thought. Even where confusion or darkness appears, it is met by the enduring call toward illumination. After establishing the path of humanity, the Lord turns to the archangels, described as true children of heaven, and assigns them their role. Free from the influence of the devil, they are to delight in the living beauty of nature, participating in its creative processes with an immediate and unreflective joy. Yet they are also given a higher aim, to fix in enduring thought what is otherwise fleeting. This goal remains beyond their present state, as their earlier song reveals a consciousness still bound to the natural order. They too are to advance, moving from simple contemplation toward a deeper understanding of the whole. With this charge they depart, and the scene closes upon the heavenly realm, leaving Mephisto alone. Even then, he cannot resist a final note of ironic familiarity, expressing satisfaction at his continued place within the greater order. I like, at times, to hear the ancient's word, and have a care to be most civil. It's really kind of such a noble lord, so humanly to gossip with the devil. His tone suggests both defiance and acknowledgement, revealing that, despite his opposition, he remains bound within the same universal structure. This prologue in heaven may be viewed as a vast transformation of an ancient Semitic legend into the Teutonic myth of Faust. It has been observed that the 16th century, the era of the Reformation and the original age of Faust, showed a particular interest in dramatic presentations of the story of Job. In this sense, the poet has followed a natural impulse of his subject, which gathers into itself the mythic expressions of many significant periods. Figures such as Dante, Milton, Klopstock, and others likewise drew upon Hebrew traditions, reshaping them in accordance with the spirit of their own times. Later, toward the conclusion of the second part, elements of the Christian myth will also be taken up and integrated into this broader, all-encompassing myth of Faust. Already there appears the vision of a universal mythology, suited to convey the scope of a universal poem. The portrayal of Satan as a comic figure has often caused difficulty, yet such a representation is not without precedent. In Dante, for example, the figure takes on grotesque features, and the entire Inferno may be seen as a grand expression of grotesque imagery, where evil reveals itself as self-defeating and, in a deeper sense, absurd. This quality contributes to what is often described as the distinctive style associated with that work. Similarly, in medieval art, the depiction of Satan and his followers frequently assumes grotesque forms, whether human or otherwise. The prologue in heaven may thus be understood as a refined continuation of the old miracle play, capturing its essential treatment of the problem of evil. Even in classical tradition, traces of this approach can be found, as in the figure of Vulcan, the limping god of fire, or at times in the portrayal of Zeus himself. Throughout the entire drama of Faust, the superhuman element, represented by Mephistopheles, moves alongside the human. These two dimensions belong together within the structure of existence. Yet one purpose of this prologue is to separate the superhuman element and reveal it in its true nature, as it appears in the presence of God. In that setting, Mephistopheles must show himself as fundamentally comic, and this establishes the underlying tone of his character, which remains consistent throughout the work. From this perspective, it becomes clear why the drama contains both comic and tragic aspects. While destruction may occur, it ultimately turns back upon itself. The destructive force reveals its own futility. This same negative principle shapes the speech of Mephistopheles, giving it its sharp, satirical quality and its biting humor. In the present scene, he declares that conditions on earth are entirely bad, a statement that carries an ironic tone, since it is the embodiment of evil condemning evil itself. In earlier dramatic traditions as well, Satan appears as the accuser of humanity, criticizing human corruption while reflecting the very nature he condemns. Through this prologue, Mephistopheles reveals his universal character, as it appears before the Lord. Yet he is still granted a measure of influence over human beings, capable of leading them into error and even into tragic consequences. For this reason, the drama as a whole unites elements of comedy and tragedy in a new form, combining both into a distinctive mode of poetic expression.